The U.S. automotive, aviation, and tech sectors are facing mounting challenges from aggressive tariff policies and unexpected regulatory moves by major global powers. As retaliatory measures escalate, is America's economic landscape on the brink of transformation? European countries, including Germany, France, and Denmark, have implemented tough measures against the American auto industry. The result: major losses for top U.S. manufacturers. Germany has stopped certifying U.S.-made electric vehicles due to emissions violations. France has imposed high carbon taxes on American SUVs and trucks based on their weight and fuel consumption. Denmark has completely eliminated incentives for American EVs. As a result, automakers like Tesla, Ford, and GM are experiencing serious impacts. Stock prices are dropping sharply. Over 12,000 vehicles from these companies have been held at EU ports. Most notably, more than 200,000 U.S. workers have been laid off in just 3 weeks. In response, Tesla has announced its withdrawal from the European market and is shifting focus to Southeast Asia, including India, Vietnam, and Thailand. Meanwhile, unemployment is surging in key automotive states like Michigan, Ohio, and Texas. Workers are losing healthcare coverage, consumer spending is falling, and local governments are losing tax revenue. Former President Trump's tariff policies continue to heavily impact the auto industry, particularly through a 25% tariff on imported vehicles from Mexico and Canada. This has indirectly affected Japanese automakers, like Toyota, Honda, and Nissan, which assemble vehicles in these countries. In response, Japan has ramped up investments in hybrid and EV production. Thailand and Vietnam aiming to release low-cost electric vehicles, such as the 2025 Nissan Leaf, priced around $20,000. Despite the tariffs, Japanese cars still hold a 35% market share in the U.S. thanks to their durability, fuel efficiency, and low maintenance costs. Japanese companies are also strengthening ties with the EU, focusing on clean technologies and sustainable supply chains. American consumers continue to favor Japanese cars for being $5,000 to $7,000, cheaper than their American counterparts in the same segment, lower maintenance costs, save drivers $500 to $1,000 annually. This puts American automakers at a disadvantage, leading to production cuts, job losses at dealerships, repair shops, and parts supply chains. One of the most severe consequences of tariff policies is the impact on the American aviation industry. Boeing, in an attempt to cut costs, outsourced part of its production to Mexico only to face a 200% tariff imposed by President Trump, branding it a punitive measure. As a result, Boeing lost its competitive edge, aircraft prices tripled, numerous orders canceled. The company's stock dropped 8% in just 2 days. Domestic airfare has risen by 15 to 20%, especially on routes using older Boeing aircraft that can't be replaced. The aviation industry has cut jobs affecting airport staff, technicians, and flight attendants. Some domestic routes, especially in remote states like Montana, Alaska, and New Mexico, have been canceled due to inefficiency, leaving residents with fewer travel options. In Alaska, transportation costs have surged due to the new tariffs driving up prices for gasoline, food, and building materials. The state's tourism sector is also suffering as airfare increases by 20%, with a projected loss of 8 to 10 million visitors this year. Logistics companies like UPS, FedEx, and Alaska Airlines. They've seen sharp declines in stock values. Meanwhile, major tech companies, Apple, Intel, and Dell, are struggling with a shortage of imported components. That means higher production costs and reduced revenue and profits. Nationwide prices for consumer goods, food, and electronics are on the rise, especially in rural and suburban areas. Households are spending an extra $200 to $400 per month on living expenses, young people. They're facing growing difficulty accessing essential tech like laptops and smartphones, impacting education and remote work opportunities. Could Maloney become the special intermediary between the EU and the White House if Trump is reelected? A private meeting in Washington hints at significant signals. On July 13, 2023, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni met privately with former U.S. President Donald Trump at his Washington residence, just hours after her official meeting with President Joe Biden. Trump stated, "We have a 100% chance of reaching a trade deal with the EU if I return to office," signaling an interest in reviving negotiation channels that had previously stalled. Meloni, for her part, emphasized the shared objective of making the West great again, underscoring a common alignment in conservative political values. Trump described Meloni as a strong and respected woman, adding that Europe respects her, suggesting she may serve as a potential bridge between Washington and Brussels in the event of his return to the White House. Should trade talks resume under an America First approach, European consumers could face higher prices on imported goods. Conversely, American industries might be affected by potential EU retaliatory measures if relations turn tense. Meloni, with a long-standing personal rapport with Trump, could help ensure a more stable dialogue, mitigating the risk of sudden policy shifts between two of the world's largest economies. During the Biden administration, a temporary agreement was reached, but by March 2025, Trump reinstated a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, prompting the EU to prepare retaliatory measures worth 26 billion euros. In 2023, trade in goods and services between the EU and the US reached 1.6 trillion euros, accounting for roughly 20% of the EU's total global trade volume. Trump has previously referred to the EU as a trade adversary and opposed multilateral agreements like the TTIP, preferring bilateral negotiations. He has also criticized the EU's regulatory stance on U.S. tech companies. The EU remains concerned that renewed tariffs could disrupt exports and supply chains. In response, Brussels is pushing forward its strategic autonomy agenda, aiming to reduce dependency on the U.S. in sectors like defense and technology. Instruments like the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, and data protection regulations, GDPR, are being enforced to safeguard the EU's long-term interests. While Germany and France back the idea of an independent European defense strategy, Italy, under Meloni, has signaled a more pragmatic approach toward cooperation with Trump and the Republican Party. This divergence could complicate the EU's ability to present a unified stance in response to evolving U.S. policies. As the 2024 G7 President and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni chaired the G7 summit held in Fasano, Italy, from June 13th to 15. The summit marked a historic first, with the participation of Pope Francis, alongside leaders from member nations and international guests. Meloni has maintained a personal connection with former President Trump since before her premiership. She was the only EU leader to attend his inauguration in January 2025. However, other EU leaders, such as French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, have kept a degree of distance from Trump. They maintain that any bilateral arrangements must stay within the EU's collective framework to preserve unity and prevent internal divisions. If Meloni succeeds in her role as a mediator, EU citizens could avoid additional tariffs from the US, stabilizing import prices and protecting jobs in export-oriented industries. American consumers, in turn, could benefit from continued access to European goods, particularly automobiles, wines, and high-end products. 3 Chinese warships recently appeared near Australia's coast, just 150 nautical miles off Sydney. What is really happening, and how might Australia and the United States respond to this unexpected military move by Beijing? On February 19, 2025, 3 Chinese naval vessels, comprising a Renhai-class cruiser, a Zhangkai-class frigate, and a Fuchi-class replenishment ship, were detected approximately 150 nautical miles east of Sydney. The ships passed through Australia's exclusive economic zone and conducted training exercises, including live fire drills, without prior notification. Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles responded by stating, "We are monitoring their every move." In light of these developments, Australia has announced a AUD 1.6 billion investment to upgrade RAF-based Tyndall in the Northern Territory. This strategic upgrade is designed to accommodate U.S. strategic bombers, such as the B-52, and to enhance the base's capacity for joint military operations. Australia and the United States have maintained a long-standing alliance under the ANZUS Treaty. Signed in 1951, the treaty binds the two nations to consult and act jointly in response to threats in the Pacific region. Australia invoked ANZUS for the first time following the September 11th attacks, offering support to the United States in the global fight against terrorism. In 2021, the AUKUS partnership was established between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, aimed at deepening defense cooperation in areas such as nuclear-powered submarines, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and hypersonic technology. AUKUS is widely viewed as a strategic move to enhance deterrence and defense capabilities across the Indo-Pacific. The growing U.S. military presence in northern Australia, particularly at bases in Darwin and Tyndall, has raised concerns among neighboring countries. China has voiced its opposition to Australia's involvement in AUKUS and its plan to acquire nuclear-powered submarines, warning that such moves could escalate tensions and increase the risk of conflict in the region. A spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs described the agreement as a dangerous and misguided path and cautioned against the potential for a regional arms race. While the expansion of military infrastructure, such as at RAF bases in Tyndall and Darwin, brings economic opportunities, including job creation and improved local infrastructure, some Australian citizens and former officials have expressed concern that increased military activity may elevate the country's exposure in the event of regional conflict. Indonesia and several other Southeast Asian nations have also reacted with caution. Indonesia, in particular, has emphasized the importance of restraint and has called on all parties to remain committed to regional peace and stability. The United States is actively expanding its military footprint in northern Australia, with infrastructure projects underway at RAF Base Tyndall and RAF Base Darwin. These developments, funded in part by the U.S., are intended to support the deployment of bombers and submarines, while also enhancing rapid response capabilities across the Indo-Pacific. As part of the AUKUS plan by 2027, U.S. and U.K. nuclear-powered submarines are expected to rotate through HMAS Stirling Naval Base in Western Australia. Under the Submarine Rotational Force West initiative, Australia is set to receive 3 Virginia-class submarines from the United States in the early 2030s, and will also work with the United Kingdom to co-develop the SSN AUKUS class, with deployment anticipated in the early 2040s. From immigration and trade deficits to redefining the idea of the Western Alliance, Europe is once again at the heart of Donald Trump's global agenda. What lies ahead for citizens on both sides of the Atlantic? In a July 2018 interview with CBS News, former President Donald Trump referred to the European Union as a FOE in trade matters, stating, "I think we have a lot of foes. I think the European Union is a FOE, what they do to us in trade." Now, according to Anthony Gardner, former U.S. ambassador to the EU, Trump believes internal division is the most effective way to weaken the bloc. Gardner noted that the EU has been undermined by years of criticism, as is happening now under Trump. During a meeting with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni in Washington on April 17, 2025, Trump expressed optimism about a potential trade deal with the EU, asserting that there will be a trade agreement, 100%. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen reiterated the EU's preference for dialogue, but affirmed the bloc is prepared to take countermeasures if necessary, including the imposition of digital service taxes on U.S. companies. Should U.S.-EU relations deteriorate further due to divisive strategies or controversial remarks, consumers on both sides of the Atlantic may feel the impact of higher import tariffs, leading to rising prices, especially for European imports like automobiles, wine, and pharmaceuticals. In 2024, the European Union recorded approximately 912,000 first-time asylum applications from non-EU nationals, a 13% decrease from 2023's total of 1.05 million. The largest share of applications was received by Germany, 25%, followed by Spain, 18%, Italy, 17%, and France, 14%. The majority of asylum seekers came from Syria, Venezuela, and Afghanistan. President Trump has argued that current immigration policies pose significant challenges to European nations. In a recent statement, he claimed that the people of Germany are tired of a program that lacks common sense, especially regarding energy and immigration. Immigration continues to shape labor markets, social welfare systems, and community life across Europe. Many EU citizens have felt increasing pressure on housing, healthcare, and education infrastructure, particularly in major cities. However, immigration has also helped address labor shortages in key sectors such as agriculture, healthcare, and construction. Debates sparked by leaders like Trump and Prime Minister Meloni have brought to the forefront the broader question: should migration be managed primarily as a risk to control or as a resource to harness? In 2024, the U.S. trade deficit in goods and services with the European Union reached $235.6 billion, an increase of $26.9 billion compared to 2023. With Italy specifically, the U.S. recorded a $44 billion trade deficit, exporting approximately $32 billion in goods and services, while importing about $76 billion. Trump has emphasized the need for fair trade relationships, calling on partners such as the EU and Italy to help reduce the imbalance. He has argued that bilateral trade must be adjusted to ensure reciprocity. In an attempt to ease tensions, the EU has proposed eliminating industrial tariffs on both sides, excluding agricultural products. However, the Trump administration has insisted on including agriculture in the negotiations, causing talks to stall. If either side imposes tariffs, consumers may face higher prices for European products like wine, cheese, and cars, as well as for American electronics. Small businesses, particularly exporters, could also be adversely affected. Anthony Gardner has underscored Italy's unique position in the EU, noting that it received the largest allocation from the bloc's post-pandemic recovery fund, approximately $191.5 billion under the Next Generation EU program. Gardner advised that Prime Minister Meloni should remain mindful that she represents not only Italy, but also the broader interests of the EU. According to Eurostat data, as of December 2024, around 51% of Italy's total exports were directed toward EU member states, highlighting the country's significant reliance on the single European market. Former President Trump has previously asserted that the EU was formed as an economic competitor to the United States. He has argued that the bloc has taken advantage of the U.S. through what he perceives as unfair trade practices. Donald Trump aims to revive the Plaza Accord, but this time leveraging tariffs and military withdrawals. Will this strategy undermine the U.S. dollar's position and jeopardize America's financial credibility? In the aftermath of the 1985 Plaza Accord, a pact between the U.S., Japan, Germany, France, and the U.K., the U.S. dollar fell by 50% over 2 years. The agreement succeeded in making American goods cheaper, reducing the trade deficit and supporting domestic production. But it also led to a prolonged asset crisis, especially in Japan. Now, Trump wants to replicate this strategy with his so-called Mar-a-Lago Accord. But instead of cooperation, he's choosing confrontation by imposing tariffs and even threatening to withdraw military support. These moves could raise import costs, affect consumer prices, and diminish global confidence in the U.S. dollar. Trump's administration has been pushing a strategy aimed at devaluing the U.S. dollar by imposing strong tariffs and threatening to withdraw military support from uncooperative allies. Economic advisor Stephen Moran has suggested raising import tariffs to 50%, a significant jump from the current average of just 2%. The goal? To pressure other countries to adjust their exchange rates in favor of the U.S. This approach has sparked negative reactions. In the financial markets, the U.S. dollar dropped by more than 1% against a basket of major currencies, hitting its lowest point in 3 years. Meanwhile, U.S. Treasury yields increased due to concerns over the government's ability to meet its debt obligations. The devaluation of the dollar has made imports more expensive, contributing to inflation. In March 2025, import prices fell slightly by 0.1%, but warnings suggest they could rise again due to the new tariff policies. Treasury bond yields have surged to their highest levels since 1982, all due to growing concern about Trump's economic confrontational strategy. American citizens are now facing a double impact: higher living costs and more expensive consumer loans. A recent survey revealed 63% of global fund managers believe the U.S. dollar could lose its status as the world's reserve currency within the next 5 to 15 years. The Trump administration is considering withdrawing its security umbrella, meaning halting military support from NATO allies who fail to meet defense spending targets. On February 10, 2024, at a rally in South Carolina, Trump declared that if NATO countries don't pay their fair share, he would encourage Russia to do whatever they want with those nations. This move marks a major shift in U.S. foreign policy, raising questions about America's commitment to global security. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg warned that such statements could undermine the security of the entire alliance and put both us and European soldiers in danger. Additionally, defense spending would likely increase, putting pressure on national budgets and social programs. The Trump administration is proposing a controversial financial policy, urging nations holding U.S. debt to switch to 100-year bonds with low or zero interest rates. The goal: reduce government borrowing costs amid rising interest rates and a national debt surpassing $36.2 trillion, with around $9.2 trillion set to mature in 2025. However, this proposal is raising concerns about the U.S.'s credit reputation. Europe's Scope Rating Agency has warned that if current trade and financial policies continue, the U.S. could face a downgrade in its credit rating. Howard Marks, co-founder of Oaktree Capital, has cautioned that overuse of America's golden credit card, the ease of borrowing driven by investor trust, could have severe consequences if that trust is eroded. For American citizens, borrowing costs may rise, impacting home loans, tuition fees, and personal consumption. For the government, losing investor confidence could make it more difficult to fund social and defense programs.